Hi, my name is Irene Chen, and I am a PhD student in the Clinical Machine Learning group. Our goal is to develop machine learning methods that address problems in healthcare, including advancing clinical care. These days, I'm working on a project working specifically on disease phenotyping. Disease phenotyping means that you can better understand how maybe chronic diseases develop over time. A lot of the diseases we think of, for example, asthma or autism or heart failure, we think of them as one type of disease, one main disease, and maybe it manifests slightly differently. And it turns out that some diseases, like the ones I mentioned, develop very differently over time. And in fact, they may even be considered separate diseases entirely that all have a common manifestation. That's why they're lumped together, but they can really manifest differently for different patients. So what we do is we take observational longitudinal data and from electronic health records or insurance claims, any large data source that we've been able to digitize and put into computers for researchers like me to analyze. Then we use machine learning methods that we've developed specifically to address these questions of what happens when you have longitudinal records. Maybe a lot of it is missing. Maybe we don't know, maybe there's a lot of noise in the measurement process, so the biomarkers themselves can be quite noisy. And specifically, I've been looking at a question of left censorship. What I mean by that is we only start measuring patients once they come into the system. So in the case of a disease, for example, once they get diagnosed, then we start measuring. We maybe do a lot more different blood tests, different diagnostic tests, and checking on them over the years. However, a lot of patients may come in at different times. Maybe they come in very early because they're able to have access to healthcare. Maybe the hospital is just down the street, or they have a family member who's able to spot that for them very early on. And then other patients wait a long time and they come in and they get diagnosed pretty late on in the same disease progression. This kind of measurement noise, this kind of left censorship can impact our methods of developing disease phenotyping. And as a result, we build a deep generative model that allows us to learn a latent variable, so that's the disease heterogeneity, how the disease may manifest differently across all the patients, and the amount of left censorship, so how to align a different patient compared to another patient. So we learn both of these variables as continuous latent random variables, and given observational data, we're then able to sort of decouple and better infer what these latent random variables should be. We've done some tests and very encouraging experimental results on Parkinson's disease and heart failure data sets, in addition to a lot of synthetic data results. And we're quite optimistic that we're able to ramp up to even more large-scale analysis for even other diseases over many, many years for many, many more patients. If we're able to be ultimately successful, we'll be able to better understand many chronic diseases, and we could even infer things like treatment options, figuring out which patients will respond best to which treatments, which can then guide clinical care.